you so much for joining me on our Blue Sofa today.
Thank you for being there.
What are the main interdependencies that should be considered when shaping and strengthening European sovereignty?
I mean, you mentioned the word interdependence is exactly the right thing. It's all interconnected. We are seeing in the enabling layer 3 essential points. We're seeing supply chain resilience, which basically means securing both stockpiling as well as securing our supply chains. Secondly, we see defense financing, so the funding of capital must be there. And third of all, and that's key, it's securing our capability in what we call the defense tech stack, so in essence, emerging technologies. And to give you an example there, how they're all interconnected, you cannot stockpile in large quantities unless you have the capital to do so, and you need the required capex, which again requires debts and insurers to give you that money. And at the same time, in order to use it for the technologies and for cutting-edge technologies that you need the people and the workforce in order to translate that money then into capability, right? So it's all connected in this enablement layer. And basically what we are saying is you need kind of this kind of second-order thinking, fundamentally, where you go from just thinking about troops, equipment, or procurement budgets all the way to what are the key elements that enable this long-term.
Europe has long benefited from stable and predictable global trade and supply chains. With increasing geopolitical pressure and the re-emergence of tariffs, particularly driven by the competition between the US and China, how do you assess the impact on Europe's economic resilience and industrial competitiveness?
I think what we see here is that Europe is in essence collateral damage, right? So the main point of the tariffs, especially when we look at China, the rest of the world, is both driven by US domestic politics as well as driven by the great power conflict between the US and China. And therefore, our supply chains are driven by the geopolitical risk that we are not in control of fundamentally, right? And when everybody in the beginning of the year, when the tariffs kind of first came up, the tariffs then went away and everybody thought, okay, we're done with this now. And what we're seeing, they're coming back, they will remain as an instrument, and we are fundamentally moving from a rule-based system to a power-based system in our world, right? So that is something that we need to contend with, whether we like it or not, which means that we should act on what Europe is best at. Europe is best at making alliances, at playing this interdependence, and fundamentally not having autarky, but having sovereignty in order to be able to do the key tasks that are relevant for our credible deterrence and force multiplication.
Why is leadership in cutting-edge technologies such as AI or quantum computing and advanced defense systems so central in maintaining credible deterrence and operational readiness?
Well, I would say quite simply because it defines what the battlefield of the future will look like. It already defines what the battlefield right now in Ukraine looks like, fundamentally. It's when we're talking about drones, when we're talking about AI-based targeting and surveillance, etc. So when we're thinking about owning the tech stack, so to speak, we shouldn't only think about you owning the end solution, right? Not owning the final product, but we should think about, do we actually also own the IP of everything that goes in it? It doesn't help us if a product on the battlefield is produced in Germany, but everything that's inside, all the technology that's inside is produced in China, a country that is currently massively supporting Russia in the Ukraine war, right? So we are running here into a geopolitical risk that we need to contend with, and we can only do so by becoming more resilient.
There is a financing gap in scaling innovative SMEs, particularly in the Valley of Death.
Yes.
And the need for new cross-institutional financing models and PPPs. Yeah. What practical approaches have proven effective in building these partnerships and aligning diverse stakeholders?
Absolutely. I mean, maybe I start with explaining what the Valley of Death is. It fundamentally describes the long tail that we see in defense tech. So because it takes so long to actually build a product and procure it, the lead times from idea to actually selling something are much, much longer. And you, in essence, only have one client. It's fundamentally only the government, right? So this means that if if you don't survive for a long time, which with risk capital is actually quite hard, you fall into this valley of death, which after prototyping you basically just phase out. Right? So you need institutional capital, so not governmental capital, but institutional capital to come in and help you do this. And the way that institutional capital can do this is if they can price risk. And they are able to do so if the government is transparent with regards to its procurement, so what is in the pipeline, how long will it take, and if the government also pursues, I would say, hybrid financing mechanisms, public-private partnerships, for example, right, to crowd in investors and not to crowd them out.
Translating strategy into actual capability on the ground is often the hardest step.
Yeah.
Especially in complex multi-stakeholder domains. What best practices and organizational mechanisms help ensure effective implementation and real impact for the armed forces?
Two things come instantly to mind. I would say, first of all, ecosystems. And an ecosystem doesn't mean you basically put everybody in a room and then you see what happens. But an ecosystem is you continuously build interdependence and a network between industry, the public sector, the end user, obviously, so the soldiers that are actually using the material in the end, in order to rapidly prototype and rapidly develop in the innovation ecosystem, right? And the German armed forces, for example, are targeting this as a key element of development, right? With the new innovation hub by the German armed forces, etc. And I would say a second thing is remind ourselves what is the essence of, for example, German military leadership. An essence of German military leadership is mission command. It's in essence a decentralization of responsibility. So continue to do that and let the people make the decisions that will ultimately have to live right with the outcomes of it. Right, decentralizing a mission command also and bringing that further back into the armed forces will be a key step in order to make ecosystems like that work.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.